Okay, so what we're going to talk about today is review 6 basics concepts, recognize the part of the soil test recommendation, choose the correct type of fertilizer, learn how to determine the contribution of organic amendment and cover crops, and learn how to calculate liquid fertilizer rates. All right, so in the grand scheme of things, your vegetable growers, they need to have 4 documents: a marketing plan, a fertilization schedule, an irrigation schedule, and a pest management plan. You want to make sure that they start off the right foot. The 2 in red are important because you all know that managing fertilizer without managing nutrient and water is like a wasted effort. So they're going to always ask you a lot about the fertilizers, and then you ask them, how do you water? They're going to say, oh, I don't know, it just comes on when I'm sleeping and it just turns off when I get up. So that's probably where you can make the greatest impact on those people's lives and on their plant health, is shifting the conversation from fertilizer to water management. All right, I've put down what are the components, the general components of an irrigation schedule, have a target irrigation volume, fine-tune based on soil moisture measurement, know the contribution of rainfall. Sometimes it's obvious if it's bare ground or if you have plastic. Sometimes you're going to have a spodic layer, the water table is going to go up. So know what the contribution of the rainfall is. Have a rule for splitting irrigation because our soils do not hold a lot of water at one time. So remember when we were in grad school, the analogy of the glass. If your glass is small, that's how much water your soil can hold. Don't pour 50 gallons on it. What you're going to have to do, pour small amounts at a time. So the rule for splitting irrigation is really important. And of course, keep irrigation record. The fertilizer schedule, that's the big picture, soil test and understand the recommendation. That's what we've done up until now. Lime if necessary. Apply organic amendment if you do, using either cover crop, compost, or manure. Incorporate the pre-plant fertilizer. Side dress or develop a weekly fertigation schedule. So really, these are the different types of math we're going to have to do. 5th point, use foliar fertilization, and I put that in parentheses. I put it in parentheses because really we don't have a recommendation for using foliar fertilization except for calcareous soils. 6, assess the efficacy of the fertilizer program through leaf or petal analysis. What counts? And remember what I think there was Rao said that we don't fertilize the soil, we fertilize plants. So what counts is what the plants get inside of them, and you will only know that through either leaf analysis or petal sap analysis. And 7, which is one thing that very few people do, trap residual nutrients at the end of the season with a cover crop. Too many of our growers, they think that what happens in the soil ends on the last day of harvest. There is no consequences to abandon the field, let things rot, let the insects move in, let the disease become rampant, and then they don't understand why they have a high pest pressure problem when they start the next time. So another thing that you need to try to drill in their head is that no, a field is there all the time. Do something to it all the time. So concept number 2, the 4 R's. Right source, right time, right place, right rate. These are the 4 questions we always have to answer when we try to implement a recommendation. What, how much, when, and where. Pretty simple. So when it comes to record keeping, encourage your growers to record the date, the material they use, how much, when, where, and also who operated the tractor, what was the tractor speed, what was the setting, and what was the weather on that day. Concept 3, fertilizer placement. And that's really important because the exposure to the plant, the placement in the field is going to be different based on the method. So first is broadcast. Broadcast is a little bit of everything everywhere, right? That's what you do when you lime. That's what you do when you have row crops. Row crops cover the entire field. Row crops have roots everywhere in the field. So it's okay to broadcast fertilizer in this kind of setting. Other method is modified broadcast. Every time you have crops that do not occupy the entire field. What are those? Tree crops, citrus, blueberries, vegetables under plastic. Do you need to fertilize the row middles? The answer is no. Say no. No. Why? Because now you are fertilizing the weeds. So now you are working against yourself. So modified broadcast, you just put the fertilizer somewhere on the field. It's not uniform across the field. Next method is band. So band is, in a way, band is a more focused placement of a modified broadcast. And really, usually you use a different equipment and it just comes out of a tube. And you can apply the fertilizer or compost in a banded way. And finally, you can inject your fertilizer either through a drip system or through an overhead system. And now you're dealing with fertigation. All right, so here's the example. That's your field. In red on the side is where your fertilizer is going to be placed. And you don't want the fertilizer that was supposed to fall in between the row middles to fall there. So you're going to put it where the beds are going to be formed. So now you only put fertilizer where the beds are going to be formed. All right, fourth concept. What is an acre? Sounds like a philosophical question. Who are we? What are we doing here? Where are we going? But it does have a really practical application. You know those guys? All right, so there are different definitions of acres. And of course, the growers always remind us, I pay my taxes based on real estate. So don't tell me that an acre is not an acre. Okay, so 1 acre, 43,560. It's pretty much a square of 209 by 209 square feet. For those of you who were born with the English units, it makes no sense, but after a while you learn them and then they will make sense. Second type of acres is the linear bed foot definition. Because on a lot of horticultural crops, we do not fertilize and manage fields. We manage rows of crops. So in a way, you could have a field that is 2 feet wide and 10 miles long. It would make no difference. The plants don't care. So in that case, you always have to face the determination of how many rows of my crops or how many rows of plastic I have in an acre. So you do that by dividing 53,560 by the bed spacing expressed in feet. So for example, 1 acre of watermelon, you divide 43,560 times 8 and you get 5445. You can do the same thing with seeded crops, like the example is sweet corn every 28 inches. So now you divide 23,560 by 2.3 because you need to convert the 28 inches in decimal feet. That's even a concept that Americans don't understand, so be careful. The decimal feet. But 43,560 by 2.3 gives you 18,930 linear feet of row. So what does that mean? It means that you have about 19,000 feet of row of corn in a solidly planted acre of corn. So now you're thinking rows. And then for those of you who deal with pesticides, for pesticide application, you use the treated acre concept. It depends on where you're putting your pesticides. So for growers, there are 3 kinds of acres. So I gave you the tables. All I did is divide 43,560 by the typical row spacing. You get that table in the vegetable production handbook. You got that in our handout here. After a while, you'll know those numbers by heart. And those numbers are good. Now, sometimes people will ask you also, how do I know how many seeds I need to buy? Well, you can estimate the distance between seeds, know the distance between rows. Now you know how many rows you have in an acre. You can calculate the amount of seeds you need. So that's a concept that's pretty useful. What's important and what is good is that our fertilizer recommendations are standardized for bed spacing. I'll get to that a bit later. What happens when somebody uses a non-standard bed spacing? So these are for rows, and these are for the main crop: 4 feet strawberries, 5 feet cantaloupe, 6 feet tomato, pepper, eggplant, and 8 feet watermelon. Now, some of you, do you have any growers who grow mini melons? The mini melons or watermelons, they are not the vining growth habit is not as aggressive as typical melon. You can put them closer. So some people put them on 4 feet, or some people put them on 5 feet. So now you need to do an adjustment to the fertilizer rate. But we'll get to that in just a minute. Concept 6, that's very important, is what do those 3 numbers on the fertilizer bag mean? You know, and I do, but you need to make sure that people you're talking to do know. So unfortunately, it's not NPK, it's NP205 and K2O. The second thing that is important, and then we've heard talk a lot about phosphorus, is if you're in an area that has typically high phosphorus, it's good to have fertilizer that has no P. So the second number could or should be a 0. And that many times is a big shift in mindset from the fertilizer dealers. They don't feel good about selling something that has a big 0 in it. But you need to help them too. And finally, a lot of our recommendations in vegetables, if you notice, the amount of N is the same as the amount of K that is required. So help yourself, make the math easy for you, use a fertilizer that is X or X. If you do something like that, you're already well on your way in simplifying your application and simplifying your math. And don't let a fertilizer dealer sell you something that you don't want, or encourage your growers not to accept that. All right, so these are the 6 basic things that you need to know. How many of you didn't know any of those? This, I'm preaching to the choir, but that's what you need to help people remember every time you deal with them.